Games rated E to M. Welcome to Nintendo Power Podcast. This episode, we share our hands-on experiences with Metroid Dread and look back at 35 years of the Metroid saga. My name is Chris, and this episode I'm joined by Nate from Nintendo Treehouse. Hi, Nate.
Hey there.
And Anthony from the social media team at Nintendo of America. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for coming back, guys. And, you know, like me, I know you've both been preoccupied with a certain game the past few days, or maybe preoccupied actually puts it a little too lightly because, I've been spending just about every hour of my free time playing Metroid Dread, and it's everything I hoped it would be. And, we've been trading a few texts here and there while we've all been playing, but I've tried not to talk about the game with you too much because I really wanted to share it all for our discussion today. So are you ready to get into it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So before we dig into Metroid Dread, I actually want to back up for just a few minutes to quickly recap how we got to this game because, this is the final chapter in a 5-game arc of 2D Metroid games that spans 35 years. And of course, this story arc only includes the fully 2D games and doesn't include the Metroid Prime series or Metroid Other M. And so this particular saga all started, of course, with Metroid for the NES back in 1987. And I just want to give a quick story recap here, the key points that people may want to know, before going into Metroid Dread. And actually, all of this is kind of recapped at the beginning of Metroid Dread. But so this game started with researchers discovering an unknown life form that they would name Metroid, but space pirates tried to steal it and take it to their homeworld with plans to weaponize it. So Samus is actually brought in to stop them. And along the way, she defeats Kraid, Ridley, and Mother Brain and destroys the space pirates' bases. So, the lesson here is don't mess with Samus. Now, we went on to Twitter and Facebook and asked fans to share their favorite Metroid games. And Nevos chose Metroid Zero Mission as his top pick, which is actually the Game Boy Advance remake of the original NES adventure because, as he put it, the game feels like a mix of the best parts of the Metroid games. And I agree, and actually Metroid Zero Mission might just be my favorite Metroid game too. Well, maybe until Metroid Dread, but we'll get to that one in just a minute. But even in the original NES version of the game, all the building blocks were there for the series. It really popularized a whole new style of play where you work through a maze, finding upgrades to enter new areas. And I can, strongly remember my first experience with that game and just, how big of an impression it made on me. So, I wonder, Nate, did you play the original Metroid back in the day or come to it later? Or what was your first experience with that game?
Oh, I played it in 87. I was 12 years old, and I was obsessed with it. I still can't believe I beat it because I've gone back and played it as an adult, and it's not an easy game. But yeah, I fell in love with it. I think because it was such a mishmash of genres, it was sci-fi, but it was you're shooting things, but then you're also platforming. But it's also a puzzle game, an environmental puzzle game to figure out how to get from A to B with the abilities that you have. I don't know. It scratched an itch that I didn't know I had, and I was completely into it as a kid, and still am into it now. And I will echo what you already mentioned, which is that the Metroid Zero Mission remake really did modernize it and add in. Really just everything that had been added to the series over the years and is pretty much a perfect game as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. Anthony, you're of a younger generation to myself, to put it mildly. So I don't imagine that you necessarily played the game back in 87, but what was your first experience with it?
Yeah, you're right to assume. I definitely didn't play it in '87 because I wasn't alive in '87. But
how dare you?
Having just kind of playing Metroid Dread and working on this game, I've had to go back and do a lot of research myself and sort of learn a lot about the history of this game and Samus and all the adventures she's been on so far. So. My first actual experience was with Samus Returns on the Nintendo 3DS. So, I got really excited after playing that. I played through all of it and was kind of obsessed. And even though I didn't get a chance to go back and play all of the older games, I mean, I couldn't be more excited for Metroid Dread. So I know you said we'll get to it, but I'm definitely stoked to talk about how you guys like it and what everybody's looking forward to.
Absolutely. Well, just to finish up kind of talking about the original NES Metroid, I think one of the reasons it's kind of challenging to go back to today is because there's no map. It's you'd think kind of a big map is synonymous with Metroid games, but back then you just didn't have one. You actually didn't even have a full save feature. You had the password save functionality, which thankfully now, if you were to like go back and play the game, for example, with Nintendo Switch Online with that NES collection, you can actually use the spin points and save anywhere, which makes it a little bit easier. Also, the rewind feature makes it quite a bit easier to get through that
Cheater.
one.
Cheater.
Yeah. If I beat it back in the day the right way, I'm totally going to let myself cheat as much
You
as I
get a
like.
pass. Yeah, it's okay.
But that game famously, you didn't even know that Samus was a woman until the very end, and that's only if you got the special ending for completing the game a certain way, or maybe put in a special code. But that was kind of unusual at the time because there weren't a lot of strong female heroes back in 1987. So Samus was a real trailblazer, and that was another thing that made the Metroid games so special and unique. So, like I said, I do really appreciate that original Metroid, but I would strongly recommend that if anyone was going to check out that original Samus adventure, see if you can find Metroid Zero Mission, because that really is an amazing game. Now, moving on to Metroid 2 Return of Samus for Game Boy in 1991. This is the next chapter. And Anthony, like you said, this game was remade as Metroid 2 Return of, I believe it was Metroid Samus Returns, actually. It's flipped the other way for a Nintendo 3DS. And just the key story beats people want to know for this one is that, Samus is sent to destroy all the Metroids on the planet where they were first discovered, which was SR-388. And she completes her mission, but leaves one Metroid alive, and it's a hatchling Metroid that imprints on her, thinking that Samus is its mother, and that little hatchling will play a big role in Super Metroid, which comes next. So Terry online picked this as his favorite Metroid game. He said, "My first Metroid game was Metroid 2 Return of Samus for Game Boy. I adored that game. I was excited every time I found a new power-up. The lack of a map feature or color variation made this game challenging, but Nintendo Power Magazine helped me out. I still have my original Game Boy cartridge." And, great points there. Obviously, it was on Game Boy. And while it was an impressive game for Game Boy, the technology back then, obviously, it was black and white, so you had limited graphics. I think maybe as a result of that, the game was a little more straightforward, so you couldn't get too lost on that smaller screen without that color variation. But still, again, for a portable adventure back then, pretty cool. Nate, was this something that you dove into back then?
That was actually one that I didn't play until after Super Metroid. Strangely enough, even as obsessed as I was with the Nintendo Entertainment System, I didn't have a Game Boy. And I don't, honestly, the reasons for that are lost to time. I don't know if my parents were just withholding it or if I was at the wrong age or what, but I didn't get to experience it until many years later. And then played through it, and it's an excellent game, especially considering the platform it was on. The challenges you noted were challenges. I think especially the monochromatic nature of it made getting lost really, really easy. And I think, in yet another example of the upgrade just being absolutely incredible, the remake of this on the 3DS, Metroid Samus Returns, expanded that game out in so many ways. I mean, not only did it pay tribute to the original in a way that was, made you realize how great the original game design was, but the way that they fleshed it out and expanded and added new moves and new abilities and really modernized and laid the groundwork for Metroid Dread it was impressive when I played it, and it's more impressive now that I see how Metroid Dread has turned out. Just a fabulous game.
Absolutely, because obviously the remake Metroid Samus Returns for Nintendo 3DS was developed in cooperation with Mercury Steam, which is also the team that Nintendo is working with on Metroid Dread. So you see a lot of the new features and the gameplay style and the evolution of the series that would inform the creation of Metroid Dread already starting here in that remake of Metroid 2. Including things like the melee counter, which is a great move. And we'll get around to how much better that is even now in Metroid Dread.
Yeah.
But Anthony, you said this was really your first big experience with the series. What was it like starting with this particular Metroid game?
Yeah, I mean, so like you said, you can kind of see, now having seen Metroid Dread, you can kind of see some of those mechanics, some of those moves, things like that, just kind of starting early on there. And for me, like that was immediately like, a huge sell because I loved all the movement, combat in that game. It was just like, at least for me, it being a first big Metroid experience, I had a ton of fun with it. And so for me, it was like, well, wow, I get to play that again, but now it's improved in so many ways. And we'll get to talking about it, but I mean, I mentioned movement before, all about the movement. I mean, if you love just that sort of like smooth gameplay, going quick, moving fast, that's what it's all about. And so, yeah, those are the things I love the most. And now we get it in spades. We get it much more. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that was a great first experience for me. But I still think I need to go back and experience some of the games in their original form somehow because I think that's really important just to sort of understand where everything kind of starts out.
Absolutely. And one game you're definitely going to want to experience is Super Metroid, which of course came out in 1994 for Super NES. And the quick story beats here to keep in mind are that Samus gives the Metroid hatchling that we talked about from the previous game to scientists who think they can harness its powers for good. But space pirates attack, darn space pirates again, and steal the hatchling. They're still trying to weaponize Metroid, the Metroid creatures. So Samus tracks them back to their homeworld to once again stop them from doing that. And right when Mother Brain is about to destroy Samus at the end, spoiler alert, I suppose, for a very old game. The Metroid sacrifices itself to save her, which has always stuck with me. I think it's one of the greatest kind of moments in Nintendo games. And then Samus, eventually destroys Mother Brain and the space pirates for good. There were a lot of comments online that people shared with us for this game in particular, but I thought Nicholas summed it up well when he said, Super Metroid is definitely my favorite. Very little hand-holding and the game mechanics are presented in a very natural way. The sense of isolation really feels unmatched compared to other games in the series, and this is compounded by its brooding environments and soundtrack. We didn't talk about this too much for the earlier games, but something that even early on, right from the beginning, the Metroid games are kind of known for is this very nuanced kind of tone, this kind of feel. Especially in the earlier games, there wasn't a lot of story that was explicitly told to you, but there was a lot you could kind of absorb and kind of feel as you went through the game, little hints in the backgrounds or just the mood of the music. And it creates an atmosphere that I think is as part of the Metroid series as anything else. Mm-hmm. So, Nate, I'm sure you could say a lot about Super Metroid, but what pops off, in your mind the most about one of the most classic Super NES games, in my opinion?
Well, you really brought up something that that you're right. We probably should have brought up at the beginning, which is the sense of solitude that these games have. I mean, you are alone. You're alone against everything, and more often than not, you're deep underground. Just without any connection to humanity. There aren't NPCs here talking to you. There's nothing friendly about the environments that you're in. And Super Metroid just nailed that. I think the jump in power of the system in terms of what they could do artistically for the different environments, but then also adding in new power-ups, the grapple beam and various other things. There were so many new ideas introduced, but overlaid on a familiar formula that I'd already fallen in love with. That I join a lot of people out there in thinking that this is just one of the greatest video games of all time. I mean, I vividly remember my first experience playing it. I play it every year now, and enjoy it just as much, and still get lost, even though I should have memorized every last little thing. I still kind of get hung up. Now I remember where to power bomb, even though, to get into Meridia, even though that's hung me up the first time I played it. But, to be able to experience a game that's that far in my past that I've played that many times and still get joy out of it just speaks to the overwhelming quality of it. Just absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's aged incredibly well. And, back then it wasn't just that it added all these great new features and new abilities for Samus to perform, which was, took it to the next level for sure. But it just really refined and fully delivered on the concepts that were there right from the beginning in the original NES Metroid. It added an auto map for the first time, which was a real game changer. And everything just felt so much better and controlled so much better. Now, Anthony, are you going to promise us right here and now that this will be on your to-do list to go back?
Yeah,
using
yeah,
Nintendo
no.
Switch Online and try this game.
We have to pry Metroid Dread from his hands first.
I know, exactly.
After Metroid Dread,
I'm kind
obviously.
of going backwards here, I'll admit. But, one thing I resonate with, though, is, and a word that was said in that message was the hand-holding aspect of it, which I really kind of appreciate how that's treated in this series. Like, a lot of people don't really like to be handheld in games, and sometimes it's kind of necessary depending on if like things are just set up that way, right? If the game's designed that way. But I feel like with this series, at least from what I've experienced, is that the aspect of there being no hand-holding is a really good thing because, like you said, you kind of soak in the atmosphere. And it kind of adds to that element of discovery. Sometimes it can be frustrating, but it's very satisfying, when you sort of get over that hump. So that in and of itself is something I really appreciate about the series. And yes, I promise I will fully dive in myself. But yeah, I've done the research though. I've definitely, just as being interested in the series, I've kind of had to just understand where Samus has gone and where she's going. But it's definitely on my list.
You'll love it.
Good man. Yeah, I envy you being able to experience that game for the first time.
Seriously.
The good news is that, and we're recapping a lot of the key beats here and kind of, and also the gameplay progression and how we got to Metroid Dread. But one of the great things about Metroid Dread is you don't have to have experienced any of this before. They give you a brief summary right at the beginning of the game that catches you up on the story, and then they ease you in pretty well with some kind of tutorial parts, and you're off to the races. So, I think it's the experience is obviously more enriched if you've experienced some of these earlier adventures, but it's by no means a requirement. And now moving on here to the final game before we get to Metroid Dread was Metroid Fusion, which released in 2002 for Game Boy Advance. And the key story beats here is, while assisting a research team back on planet SR388, where the Metroids were first discovered, Samus is infected by a new parasitic life form called X. And she is saved by a vaccine that was created with the cells from that Metroid hatchling we talked about, which then makes her immune to the X parasites. So Samus then has to battle X-infected creatures throughout the space station, including a parasite that mimics her in her power suit at full power, which comes to be called the SAX, which we'll get to more in a minute, but that was a huge part of that game. She also learns that Metroids are being bred again. So in the end, Samus crashes the space station to the surface of SR388, destroying both the X-parasites and the Metroids. So on online, Cam said that Metroid Fusion is my favorite game ever. The fear behind the SAX, the graphics of the GBA, and all the small details, like Samus holding her arm cannon differently because she's weaker in that game, all make it a joy to play over and over again. And, as I said before, currently, this is the last game in the timeline until Metroid Dread comes along. It also introduced Adam, a computer AI that follows Samus as kind of a supporting character, I guess you could say, into Metroid Dread. So, Nate, what are your memories of Metroid Fusion?
I have very, very fond memories for a number of reasons. Number one, this was actually the first game in the series that I had the pleasure of working on. I was in the localization group. This is one of the first games that I did the writing for back then. Seems an age ago. And I couldn't believe how lucky I was to be playing it during development because Metroid was obviously one of my favorite series. But from a gameplay perspective, it was impressive on a number of fronts. I think that number one, it really deviated heavily from the previous games just in terms of even simple things like the way that you regained health, by absorbing X parasites as opposed to little power pellets that would appear in the air, after shooting enemies. But also, it really was the first one I thought that started a little bit more methodically world building. Having actual updates from Adam, having actual monologues from Samus, on the elevators or in interstitials, really started laying the groundwork for a more specific and broader universe that we're now seeing really paid off in Metroid Dread. And beyond that, the SAX, I'm sure both of you feel the connection between that and the Emmys in Metroid Dread. That concept of being completely outmatched and not being able to blast your way out of a situation, but instead having to use your head and sometimes just get out I hadn't experienced it at all. And it's something that I thought was amazing in Metroid Fusion, and I think it's even better in Metroid Dread.
Yeah, I don't know which is more tense when you're kind of hiding out in a crawl space and watching the SAX slowly walk across the room, or when the SAX has found you and now it's running after you very fast and you're just trying to get out of there.
Yeah,
But yeah, it definitely.
yeah, totally.
I was definitely thinking about that when I started playing a Metroid Dread and encountered my first Emmy robot. So Anthony, another one for your to-do list, another classic. Personally, I would give a slight. I would pick Metroid Zero Mission slightly over Metroid Fusion, but they're both great. They're both classics on the GBA. Great fluid Metroid gameplay, and you can't go wrong either way.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, this is one that I actually have just sort of been like learning a ton about just because of its, you know, its place in the timeline and you know, obviously going into Metroid Dread. So all those things, you know, that Nate said, you know, I definitely have absorbed through just all of my friends and people, you know, that I've talked to that have played this game and really loved the series. So yeah, I know I have a lot to do, a lot to play, but I think I've got my priorities set.
Nice. All right, so we're finally here, the main event, Metroid Dread, which of course launches on October 8th for Nintendo Switch. And obviously there's a lot here we don't want to get into with regards to story, and we certainly don't want to spoil anything, but I'll start with just the basic beginning intro here, you know, that I think we've seen in the trailers. Video footage comes in from an unknown source that seems to show that the X-Parasite might still be alive on a remote planet called ZDR. So the Galactic Federation, as they love to do, sends other people in to check it out. And at first, it's 7 Emmy robots, but they all vanish. So then they call in Samus to once again go in and find out what happened. And then shortly after landing, a mysterious new foe traps Samus deep underground, and she must navigate her way back to the surface. And that's where we find Samus at the very beginning of Metroid Dread. Again, no spoilers, but you know, there is a lot that people, if they want to, can check out via the trailers or via articles at metroid.nintendo.com. There's actually a lot of really cool information there. And you even get a hint of the Chozo warrior who appears to possibly attack Samus. And of course, the Chozo have been a race that have been hinted at heavily throughout the Metroid series. If anyone who's played a Metroid game, you know that when you find a power-up, it's kind of in the hands of this kind of bird creature statue generally. And those are like relics of the Chozo, I think, who invented a lot of that technology. But we've never encountered an actual, at least to my knowledge, an actual living Chozo. But it seems like that might be on the table here. So Nate, you know, I know you've been, you probably got a chance to try the game before, but here recently especially, you've been really diving into the final version. What do you think?
I mean, I can't even put it into words. It really is the culmination of the series in every way. I think it's, even without spoiling it, I think you can see from the story beats we've seen so far that this is a conclusion of a story arc that began back with that first game and has been steadily building over the last, 3 decades. But it's a culmination of all the things that made the other games great. All the lessons of gameplay have clearly been put into practice here. And at a time when it's, on a system that has HD graphics, so it's looking better than it ever has before. The backgrounds are absolutely incredible. But the way that the game actually feels, I think, is the thing that's gotten me jazzed the most. And I think probably Anthony already alluded to it, so I'll let him talk about it. But a lot of that comes down to the first couple moments that you start moving. Just moving feels amazing in this game. And when you nail that right off the bat, I think you know that you're going to be in for a good ride.
Yeah, no. As soon as I turn the game on, like you said, like just moving, even just running, jumping, sliding, there's Samus slides, and all of that. Once you start really learning the game, how things work, and connecting things together, there's really no feeling quite like it. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable saying I've never actually played a game that feels this way. Like, kind of has that 2D element to it, but like Nate said, like it's just beautiful. The backgrounds are awesome. It's so smooth. Yeah, I mean, I really recommend, and I guess I can talk as a person who's like one of the people who's kind of experiencing things in a new way, but I definitely recommend going onto Metroid.Nintendo.com and checking out at least the very first couple Metroid Dread reports, because there's a lot of really great info there that'll set you up. And it goes a little bit deeper, but you definitely kind of want to have that base there. And then yeah, I watched kind of the beginning of the game to just get that recap that happens. Also super important, and not spoilery at all, but just enough to get you going. So yeah, it starts awesome and it just goes up from there. Obviously no spoilers, but man, it's amazing.
Chris, I was actually curious to hear, as a fellow sort of old Metroid vet, who played the original way back when, Anthony probably didn't realize how hard it was to what a big deal it was the first time in Metroid Dread you ran into a block that was 1 foot high and just ran over it instead of having to do a little mini jump to get over it. It's like little stuff like that. It's crazy, but it just feels so good.
The little things.
I know
yeah.
one of the first things I noticed is when there was this is right at the start of the game where, unsurprisingly, there's never been a Metroid game where you start with the morph ball. So at this point, you don't have it yet. You walk up to a little hole in the wall, and I'm just thinking, oh, okay, of course, if I get the morph ball, I'll come back here. But I just happened to press against that wall anyway, and Samus put her hand on the wall.
Yeah.
Just recognizing that, no, you can't go there yet. And it was just this little animation that they didn't technically need, I don't think. But it just goes to how smooth and how good this game feels, that every little interaction with your environment, just has that great feeling. And like you guys said, now Samus can slide for the first time. So you might do an automatic run over just a block that's 1 block high and then slide into a tunnel that then becomes a roll into a morph ball once you have that power up. And then when you're kind of running through an area filled with enemies, you can now not just do a melee counter, which was from Metroid Samus Returns on 3DS that we talked about, which is this great move where, as soon as you see an enemy kind of flash, if you time the press of the counter button just right, you'll automatically knock their attack back and be able to finish them off in one quick strike. And in some cases, that makes it much, much easier to defeat an enemy who might normally take lots and lots of shots or missiles even.
Yep.
And now you can do that on the run, right? So you don't even
Yeah.
have to stop to do the counter. You can do the kind of a dash melee counter where you're doing it as you're just kind of going through an area. So when you combine all this together and you string together all these acrobatic moves and attacks, it just flows from one movement to the next, and it all feels buttery smooth. And it really is kind of the ultimate culmination so far of kind of everything that all the gameplay mechanics that over 35 years have been building up to this. And I just couldn't agree with you guys more. It just feels great.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was something that you guys felt too, but something I really love is that when you start the game, Samus is essentially stripped of all her abilities, but it still kind of feels like like you can still feel really powerful in like lots of those early moments. Like, I mean, obviously, like there's a certain difficulty there as far as like abilities you don't have yet, things you can't do, but I mean, as you sort of scale up, you really feel like you are actually like Samus, like you are the most powerful legendary bounty hunter there is. And I love that, how it's like challenging yet so satisfying at the same time throughout the entirety of the game. It's just awesome.
Yep. That's I think one of the hooks that hooked me from the very beginning of the series is by the end of a game, coming back through an area that once terrified you, that maybe you died at a zillion times, and now you're just this bulldozer that you don't
Running
even
through
pause. You don't even have to. It's like you're torching everything in your path. I was thinking about it the other day. It's kind of like if you played through all the way through like Super Mario Brothers and then beat Bowser and then became like a fireball spewing like spin attack god and then ran backwards through the game. You're trucking through like World 1, 2 and just mowing down everything in your path. It's like Metroid gives you that feeling, unlike any other franchise that I ever have. The sense of building power and then by the end of the game just feeling unstoppable is, that's why I play video games. Is chasing that feeling.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think you get so many of those satisfying moments that continue to build and build. Like I don't know that for me anything in gaming is more satisfying than finally stumbling into a room that has that next Chozo statue holding the next power up, and you're like, ooh, what is that? And you shoot it, and then of course after you grab the power up, you ball up into a little ball and just sit in the Chozo's hands and take a screenshot
Of course.
because you got to do it, and then. And then, like you said, it gets to the point where some of the abilities you unlock later on, just like in previous games in the series, help you take shortcuts through certain areas. So you literally become like this buzzsaw, just kind of, spitting through blocks and with just nothing being able to get in your way. But of course, there's always that next challenge on the horizon. So no matter how powerful you get, until you beat the game, there's always something that you need all of that power for, and it's still going to be a challenge.
Totally.
But I love
Yeah.
how we talk kind of about the flow of a traditional Metroid game, and this one's very very much in that same vein. But I love how the Emmy zones kind of add a different spin to that. So now you will go in a special, easily recognizable kind of door that leads you into a zone where an Emmy is now active, and now it becomes where instead of you're the unstoppable force mowing through these bad guys, now you're the one that's being hunted.
Yeah.
And when you start hearing that little, these zones can be quite big. They span many, many rooms. So sometimes the Emmy may be patrolling an area that's further away, and then sometimes they're close, and you can hear them making those little beep noises that just start to make you tense up. And then depending on which level of kind of Emmy you're fighting, they have different abilities. So you got to watch out and be aware of what they can do, and use your own abilities to try to hide in some cases, like using the Phantom Cloak, which is an Aeon ability we've seen in the trailers to kind of turn invisible to the Emmy and not make so much noise. And that becomes a whole different kind of pacing and strategy. And then, once you exit that area, and it oftentimes has multiple exits, and sometimes you'll have to go away, find another ability, and then come back through another entrance to ultimately deal with the Emmy. And as we've seen in trailers and I think demonstrations from Treehouse Live, ultimately you kind of find the Omega Cannon that allows you to permanently put down the Emmy and clear that area for good. But it becomes this nice pace, this mixed pace, right, of running through the maze, exploring, uncovering new rooms, getting power-ups, and then, oh, wait a second, now I've got to be on guard. I'm in an Emmy zone, and you're dealing with that. But then you're back to the regular flow right after that. So I love that mix.
Oh, man. Me too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Totally.
And I think what you mentioned from the beginning, the sounds in the Emmy zone make such a huge part of why they're so stressful. And as a callback to Metroid Fusion, you remember when you walk into a room in Metroid Fusion, then all of a sudden the music stopped, and you're like, oh no,
yeah.
no. And then footfalls, metallic footfalls of the SAX approaching. Each Emmy zone feels like that to me. The sound is creepy. You can hear it creeping around. If it's close to you, it's making those clicking, beeping noise. I mean, that for me is a big part of the experience, and why the gameplay is so satisfying in there is because you go in and you feel it immediately.
Yeah, right away. No, like, even for me, it was like there's areas of the game, I mean, where you kind of have to like backtrack once you get certain abilities and things like that. And like when I look on my map, because trust me, you will be looking at your map a whole lot. I see that Emmy zone that I have to go through, and I'm just like, man, there's got to be another way, right?
There's gotta be a way around.
Because you think you're tough, but no, you're not. If you see like an Emmy, you're like, oh yeah, like I can maybe like get around it, whatever. You always end up getting caught somehow. And like you do have like once you kind of get right up against the Emmy, and you're right at your last moments there, you do kind of have an opportunity to counter, but I mean that opportunity is so slim. Like I mean I hardly ever nail it. So there's dread in the title for a reason. It's it's not the easiest thing to handle once you get in that Emmy zone.
Yeah, that is tough to counter, that final attack that an Emmy will give you. But I've done it like twice, almost by accident, because the timing is so narrow on it. But when you do it, it shocks you. You're like, oh my God, I survived this thing, and it's so satisfying.
Yeah, totally. The one thing I was going to add on was that I pay attention to the topography a lot more in the Emmy zones, just because the entire time you're in there, you're kind of mentally mapping out an escape route. You're like, even if you're just walking through it, you're like, I may be coming through here full steam with an Emmy right behind me at some point. I got to know where I'm going. So like, I pay attention to that environment way, way more than just when I'm outside those zones.
Right. Sometimes
Yeah.
I find a spot that I think I'll be safe. Like, oh, if I just hang from the ceiling up here and activate Phantom Cloak, and maybe it'll pass by. And then it just happens. I just watch in horror as it like walks on the ceiling and bumps right into me.
No, I'm just like
But
immediately abort, and then I just turn off the Aeon and just start running.
yeah, and if one cool thing kind of along like what I was saying with how the ME zones break up kind of the flow, one thing that I was kind of pleasantly surprised by is you'll see like story scenes and bosses and like upgrades just kind of like pop up in kind of unexpected places for me. Like, sometimes you've got your eye on a certain marker on the map and you think, okay, I'm kind of headed to that. But sometimes you just happen to fall, through a random hole in the floor, and then all of a sudden a cinematic starts, or, the ways in which, or the environments in which you get different upgrades for your weapons or your AN abilities or your suit. Those are kind of different circumstances. So there's a nice variety of stuff that kind of keeps you guessing. And I feel like the flow of it never becomes too predictable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you
You
one
might
thing,
have a boss just pop up too.
yeah, no, totally. And you mentioned like the cinematic moments. Like one of the things I really love is that, there's obviously the moment where you get into the ME zone and you see the ME and you kind of are just like running away, hiding, whatever it is. But when it's time for you to actually take one on, there's this like cinematic experience that is really, really cool. Like you mentioned the counter. I think there was one time where like I was in that moment. I was using the Omega cannon to to fight the enemy. Got caught, countered, like slid up back underneath, and like just started all over again. But just that whole experience was like something beyond just like your normal 2D experience, right? It was kind of a blend of all these different things I love about action adventure games. So yeah, I really love that about this game. There's so much, but I could talk for hours about this part of it.
I totally agree with that. The over the shoulder, man, the tension of the over the shoulder view as it's bearing down on you is obviously very intentional from the directors of the game. And I'm with you. It's like it ratchets it up, the intensity of the experience, like tenfold.
100%.
Yeah, you're charging up that Omega cannon as you're looking over the shoulder and it's crawling toward you, and you're like, am I going to get this charged in time, or is my aim good?
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, we could just go on and on about this game. There's so much to talk about. I will say, without giving anything away, of course you expect the environments to change. You expect to enter new environments as you progress through a game. But some of the ones you run into as you go through the game further and further really blew me away. And I think there's a lot of nice variety here. And like Nate, I think you said earlier on, some amazing background details. And then, of course, you're encountering new types of obstacles and enemies as well. So, yeah, the further I really should stop talking there. The further you go, just the cooler things get.
I think that's a really good point, though. The backgrounds they're diverse. Obviously each zone looks very different, has different wildlife, has different interesting things in the background because the fidelity of the graphics allowed their artists to really go crazy with sort of world building. Scenes that are telling stories sort of in the background, whether it's a robot being assembled or even just an enemy moving around back there. But I do think it's worth noting that I think I'm incredibly impressed with the Nintendo team and the Mercury Steam team when it came to designing the environments and the platforms themselves, because you need to really strike a balance between beautiful backgrounds, but also having very obvious things that you can walk on. You're operating in a 2D space, and if you over-design that so that the player doesn't know where to land when they're jumping, and it isn't able to navigate as quickly and as effectively as they want to, it's possible to over-design that. And I think they've struck an incredible balance between really feeling like I know exactly what I can walk on, what I can't, what the different blocks look like, but also having that seamless with an incredibly beautiful background that's just environmental storytelling. Really just, I can't say enough about how well they did that design part of the game.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is always very clear kind of what the environment is asking you to do. Even if you don't exactly know what item is needed to get past a particular door, you know that, okay, there's a challenge there. I'm just not ready for yet.
Yeah.
I'll come back later.
Totally.
But before I start unintentionally or maybe somewhat half intentionally talking about things we probably shouldn't get into, any last comments from you guys before we move on to the next segment?
The last thing I'll say is, you just kind of talking about some of those early challenges, like, maybe like trying to figure out how to get past a certain area, things like that. I think, one of the things early in the game is that, like, for me, I got stuck a couple times, like, where I was just like, dang, I'm just running around, shooting everything, running around the map. And I think that actually, like, it really teaches you early on, like, the types of things you should be looking for, different things to try when you're kind of stuck, and I think that carries on with you throughout the game. And that's a really great experience, because it's like you feel like you kind of start off like Samus, without much of your abilities. You don't really have a ton of power, but as you sort of progress and you not just get those abilities, but you learn things about the game, the environment, you definitely feel more empowered. So yeah, I really appreciated that about the game. And yeah, there's just so much there. I mean, it's awesome that I get to experience this as like a kind of an early new Metroid experience for me. But I'm definitely just like all in. So yeah, I love it.
I'm super happy to hear that. And I think that kind of leads me to the final point I wanted to make, which is that Metroid is really its own genre. As I mentioned earlier, it's a platformer. It's a puzzle game. It's a shooter. It's a sci-fi epic. It's a lot of things. And ultimately, it's a challenging series. It's a challenging game. And it's an acquired taste, but it's one that I think everyone should acquire. You know what I mean? There's, you talk to everybody, they know Mario, they know Zelda. These are massive franchises, and I think Metroid, for me personally, stands right up there with the rest of them. In that it's a very tightly designed experience that is so satisfying when you master it. And this is the perfect game to jump into it if you haven't played an earlier one, because as we've, it's not incredibly obvious from the way that we're all gushing about it. This one is really something special, even among the titans in the series that have already come before it. So if you've never played a Metroid game, get in there. You are going to love it. But prepare to be tested, because it's a tough game.
Get in there.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you both more. And, one thing I'll just add with regarding to that challenge level, I do really love that the game challenges me, but I would also say that it helps you out too. Mm-hmm. For example, the Emmy zones, like we've talked about, can be very challenging, and I've gotten caught by by different Emmy robots many times. But they don't send you all the way back to your last save room. If you get caught, they send you back to the door where you entered the Emmy zone. So little things like that, even if you get temporary setbacks, you never have to go too far back. And then also the map. I didn't really mention this before, but this is, I think, a much more robust map than we've ever gotten in a Metroid game before. I mean, it not only, previously you would kind of see basic flat shapes like squares or rectangles on the map screen indicating, the rooms. But now they really draw like a little mini version of the room, and you can kind of remember and recognize what room you're looking at on the map just by looking at that kind of icon map version of it, which is the exact same shape. Even some details are in there. And then you can set your own markers. Yep. And in addition, things that you come across, whether you were able to obtain them or not, are marked on the map. So there's just a lot there. You can zoom way in on it or pull way back. You really got everything you need there to help you chart out your course. And you will be using it a lot, because there really isn't much in the way of hand-holding in this particular game. So you really need to pay attention to where you're going and use all your resources to get there.
I'm going to make Anthony play with like the past games with a graph paper and plot it out like I did when I was 12, plotting out my own map for Metroid 1.
It's going to be like, wait, where's the map? Where's all the stuff that like I'm supposed to have?
You're right, though. This map is incredible. I mean, it tells you what individual blocks are. It's fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely great. All right, so moving on, we are now starting with Player's Pulse. Now, a few days ago, just for fun, as usual, we posted 3 polls on Twitter for Nintendo fans to answer. And this time, of course, all the questions were themed around the 2D Metroid saga. And the first question we asked was, do you try to go to areas out of order? And the options we gave them were, yes, I love to sequence break, or no, I go with the flow. Nate, how about you yourself? When you play a Metroid game, are you happy to just kind of go with the flow, or do you try to stick it to the developers and maybe squeeze into places you don't think you're supposed to go yet?
Well, both really. I think on my first playthrough, I almost always just go with the flow because I like to see sort of the way it was designed to play. It's sort of the natural progression of things. My second playthrough, and there always is almost immediately one of those, that's when I start trying to break it. That's when I intentionally start trying to find ways around to get to places that I shouldn't be. And then, I really think that the Metroid series has been designed from the beginning to be that way. They're designed to be played over and over again. In past games, completion rewards actually varied depending on how fast you did, how many, whether you got 100% of the items and so on and so forth. So you're really going to be playing through it a number of times, and that's always the way I spice up my second playthrough is by trying to break it. So I do both.
Yeah, I can't remember the number of times that I've died trying to run through a hot or cold zone before I was prepared to take those extreme temperatures. But the winner, or at least the one that was voted for the most, was yes, I loved a sequence break. It was very close, 55% to 45%, who generally just go with the flow. Now the next question, Anthony, was which beam is the best? And the options we had here were ice beam, wave beam, or the wide beam or spazer beam. And we included both wide beam and spazer beam as kind of the same category because they're very similar. They just appear in different games. So, Anthony, which is your personal favorite, ice beam, wave beam, or wide beam / spazer beam?
So I was just thinking about this because, it really wasn't that long ago when I finally was able to use the wide beam. So that is like a huge jump in terms of just things you can do in gameplay, and so that's why I love that one.
I agree.
It kind of takes base gameplay just to another level where it's the things you were doing before are now you're doing the same things, but you're kind of just doing them on another level. So that part of it is really cool to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any game that gives you kind of a wide beam or a spread shot or something, I'm all for it. But the fans actually voted for ice beam, 51% of the votes. And wave beam and then wide beam and spazer beam were very close. Wave beam got 26%, and then those last two together got 23%. So some nice parity, but people really apparently love being able to freeze the enemies and then stand on their heads and use them as steps to get somewhere else.
Yeah,
so you get the
that part's
Metroids
cool
off
too,
you.
for sure. Definitely.
And then the final question that we asked was, when playing a Metroid game, do you try for 100% completion? And the responses were, yes, I collect it all, or I grab what I need, maybe more. Nate, what do you think the fans voted for the most in this category?
I think they probably voted to get what they need, mainly because I feel like, especially with the more modern games in the series, Metroid Samus Returns, Metroid Zero Mission, and Metroid Fusion, 100% is a very elite task. The platforming and sort of problem solving that you have to do in order to get 100% in those games really requires an extreme level of skill. And I think not everybody is willing to put the time and effort into doing that. And so my guess is that the majority went with I get what I need.
Anthony, what do you think they picked?
So I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to say, I know we got a lot of hardcore fans of the series following us. So I'm going to say that they try and go all the way and get everything.
Well, at least among the people that voted in our polls, Anthony, they sided with you there. Yes, I collected all, got 56%, but not far behind, I grab what I need, maybe more, was 44%. So
I approve.
I think that
even though I
speaks to
lost, I approve. That's good.
Yeah. Probably speaks to the type of fans that are hanging out on Nintendo's Twitter account. But it's good to see that so many people are giving it their best. All right, next we're moving on to Warp Zone. And this is the quiz where I'll give you clues to help you identify 3 games that came out 10, 20, and 30 years ago. And since we changed the format for the quiz the last episode and missed some of the good games from that month, you'll be guessing games that came out during the months of both August and September this time. So you guys ready?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. I remember this is not a competition. It's a team sport. So you can help each other out here. So first off, 10 years ago in September of 2011, the clues are Nintendo published a cute and unusual platformer for Nintendo DS where you use the stylus and touchscreen to control up to 10 duplicate characters at once which you use to swarm over enemies or fling into the air to hit flying foes? Any guesses?
That was a Kirby game. Wasn't it that Kirby game? I forget the name of it though.
Oh,
It was Kirby.
Oh, you got half of the way there.
Yeah.
Anthony, any
I can't believe I can't remember
Mass
the name.
Attack?
Did you say Mass Attack?
Mass Attack, is that
That's
it?
it.
Yes.
I was hesitant.
Yeah.
I was hesitant. So that's why I
Yes.
kind of whispered it, you know?
Kirby Mass Attack. Good teamwork. All right, next up, 20 years ago, this is September of 2001. The clues are Nintendo published a turn-based strategy game for Game Boy Advance, where as a commanding officer for the Orange Star Army, you commanded ground, air, and naval forces across various terrain and through the fog of war, on your way to routing the enemy or capturing its headquarters. Any guesses?
Oh, that's Advance Wars, baby.
Absolutely.
Right on the head.
Coming
will
to
be
a
getting
Switch.
rebooted.
Yes, that's right. Coming to a Switch, Nintendo Switch near you.
Yep, really
wait.
looking forward to that. The original Advance Wars and Advance Wars 2 are two of my favorite Game Boy Advance games. All right, 30 years ago, this is August of 1991. I think we're before you were born territory here, Anthony.
No, I was born.
All right, cool. All right, so the clues are this Super NES launch game from Nintendo took to the air to test your skills in aerial activities that included flying a plane and a helicopter, hang gliding, skydiving, and even flying with a rocket belt, all of which used stunning Mode 7 graphics that let players fly freely in any direction for the first time on a Nintendo system. Any guesses?
That's got to be Pilot Wings, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah, Pilot Wings. Of course, out of all those things, I think my favorite activity in that game might have been taking a penguin and diving into a into a tiny little swimming pool from like 1,000
right.
feet in the air.
That's right.
It's always the little things.
All right, so we've reached the bonus question. So I'm going to play a sound, and I'll play it a couple of times. So please hold your answer. And I'm hoping that you can guess which game this sound is from and also what it comes from. So here we go. I'll play it a couple of times. And a few more. All right, any guesses?
Oh, man.
Wait, are we in a year here, or is this a free game?
Sure, I'll give you a year, 1987.
Man, it's familiar, but I don't have this one, Anthony. How about you?
Oh, yeah, Nate, you've got to have this one, man.
I got too many
know,
beeps and boops in my brain, man. They've all melded
They
together.
all sound the same.
Just a couple more clues here. It may have come from one of the games we discussed at the top of the episode, and you'll only hear this sound when you're, curled up in a ball.
What is that laying? Is that laying a bomb? Really? In Metroid?
That's it.
Yeah,
That's exactly it.
And it's funny. It's like I just like when I hear that, when you say that, I think of like I still can tell what it is because if you play like Super Smash Bros, stuff like that, it's very, very similar.
Oh, that's
yeah.
embarrassing. Embarrassing that we didn't get that off the bat, but
I know.
it's because
Well,
we're
the
used
sound-
to the new bomb noise, which it's a little bit more metallic in Metroid Dread.
Yeah.
So.
I was going to say, it's probably changed over the
We're
years.
30
and that
years
one's
ahead of
from
time.
quite a while ago. But a very good showing from you guys in the Warp Zone quiz. So congratulations on that. And before we go, we're going to head to Game Forecast. And this is where we take a quick look at some of the Nintendo Switch games that recently released or are coming soon. So on September 14th, we had Colors Live from Collecting Smiles and Cruisin' Blast from Raw Thrills and Game Mill Entertainment. On September 16th, Eastward from Chucklefish and Skatebird from Glass Bottom Games. On September 17th, we had Ni no Kuni 2, Revenant Kingdom, Princess Edition from Bandai Namco Entertainment, and Toem from Something We Made. And then on September 23rd, Diablo 2 Resurrected from Blizzard Entertainment, Fistifluffs from Playfellow Studio and Rogue Games. And on September 29th, a Juggler's Tale from Kaleidoscube and Mixed Vision. On September 30th, we have Astria Ascending from Plug-in Digital. On October 1st, it's FIFA 22, Nintendo Switch Legacy Edition. And on October 5th, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl from Ludosity and Fairplay Labs and Game Mill. And Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania from Sega. Then on October 8th, of course, Metroid Dread from Nintendo. Tetris Effect Connected from Resonard and Stage Games, Monsters and Enhance. And on October 29th, we have Mario Party Superstars from Nintendo. So a stacked month, and again, this is just a small sample of what's coming out. Nate, is there anything here that jumps out to you especially?
Well, because we got to experience Metroid Dread early, I kind of got to clear my slate of that first. But I've already got the next game I'm playing, which you just mentioned, is Eastward. I was really fascinated by the look of that game, and it looks it'll certainly be a much different experience from what I'm playing right now. But it'll probably be a nice, hopefully a little bit of a welcome break from constant tension. But game just looks really, really interesting. So I'm psyched to dig my teeth into it.
Yeah, same here. Anthony, how about you?
Yeah, well, the '90s, mid '90s, that's my era right there. So I'm gonna say Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. I mean, that game's just got all the characters for for a kid like me that I could ask for. I mean, if I can play a SpongeBob against Cat Dog or whatever, like that's just I'm sold already. So I'm really excited for that. And another one too you mentioned was Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania. That game looks awesome just because of all the characters in that game is just kind of wild. I've kind of just been following as they've been sharing more information. And yeah, I mean, it's just like it looks super fast. It looks super wacky and fun. And again, I get to play with some pretty wild characters. So I like all of that.
Yeah, all of those sound like great picks. I've definitely been looking forward to Eastward, and I'm an old school Super Monkey Ball fan. One other one I'll add is Mario Party Superstars. That's just a game that I love sitting down and playing with my kids. We never get tired of playing the Mario Party games, and this one looks like it'll be a blast. So really looking forward to that one too. Well, Nate and Anthony, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we're going to have to keep, letting each other know how our adventures are going in Metroid Dread.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, definitely.
All right, we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, see you next time. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of Nintendo Power Podcast. If you have any comments or questions you'd like us to consider answering on the show, you can email us at nintendopowerpodcast@noa.nintendo.com. Also, we always appreciate it if you can leave a review, and be sure to subscribe so you get new episodes as soon as they're ready. Thanks for listening, and keep playing with power.